Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to speak to yourself as well as our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, as well as those who are living outside of Bangladesh in different countries at this particular time. The subject of Islamophobia has to be understood in its long historical complexity. When we think of Islamophobia, it is not only a function of post 9/11, which often individuals think that 9/11 and then a Islamophobic discourse, discrimination begins to take shape. I remind people that the term Islamophobia itself originates from the French writing in the early part of the 20th century. The earliest reference to the term Islamophobia, which is in the French context, occurs during the French engagement, colonial engagement in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa with Muslim population, which had the meaning of having an inimic feeling or inimical feeling toward Islam and Muslims. And it was in the context of colonial discourses that otherized, discriminated, racialized the Muslim subject. And that term itself gets to be in limited circulation in the French. And then we move forward to Edward Said in his writing covering Islam, and then also his work on Orientalism, which is really 1979, 1980 in the post-Iranian Revolution, that Edward Said looks at how Islam is treated completely differently and, in essence, having a continued resonance of colonial discourses, Orientalist discourses that are there. So that even the genealogy of the term has a long array rather than only seeing it's a function of 9/11. More importantly, I think in the field of Islamophobia, the work of Ramon Grasfugel, Salman Sayyid, and others look at the expulsion of Muslims in Spain, which instituted a whole regime of violence, of structural otherization and dehumanization that ended up expelling not only Muslims but Jews. So we could see the construction within European thought or Eurocentricity, the racialized treatment of Muslims and Jews. For Muslims, you could say the term Islamophobia was not present, but anti-Muslim sentiments were there and anti-Semitism relative to the Jewish subject. And therefore, if we think about the relationship of the Eurocentric world to Islam and Muslims, it always passed through these structures of otherization, structures of erasures, which begin to rationalize all types of violence. Maybe I could speak a little bit in here on how I understand race and racism, because we often, when we think of race and racism, we only think of the skin color type of racism, which is, again, one of the most clearly identifiable, and it's a pernicious type of racism. But if we think about structural of racism, is the control or governing the bodies and space of targeted communities. The targeting of bodies and space, again, you spoke about your experience with Ramadan, with fasting, and your own Eurocentric teacher that looks at the world through Eurocentricity wanted to govern your body and space in relations to how you exercise your religious obligation. That governing structure of body and space, you could trace it again to the expulsion of Muslims in Spain, because the Inquisition structure that was situated against Muslims and Jews governed what Muslims wear. So Muslim and Jewish garb were subject to restrictions. So you can't wear distinctive Muslim or Jewish clothing. Your consumption of food, so you had to demonstrate that you are not actually observing halal or kosher, and therefore publicly you had to actually consume pork in order to make visible qualification to the Inquisition authority that you are no longer adhering to Islamic and Jewish dietary requirement. You also had to make sure that your windows and doors are open, so the Inquisition authorities will make sure that you're not observing any type of ritual, whether ritual bathing, ghusl, wudu, and any type of actual activities related to your religious obligation. And then lastly, also in relations to building mosques or having mosques. So many of the mosques in Spain were confiscated, transformed into churches, which continue to be the case till today. So governing the bodies and structure, bodies and space, which subsequently also have to be connected to governing and silencing the individual, because governing bodies and space require that the subject that is being racialized or being a target of racial structure doesn't have the ability to speak. And that gets us into that Muslims' right to speak the political or to speak of their condition is problematized. And therefore, you are actually only to be a huggable Muslim, that you tickle them, they laugh, and you pinch them, they say ouch, but nothing more than that. So these are, in terms of what we think relative to Islamophobia, and taking it to the contemporary period, this is the operable structure that we are living in, both being visible in Muslims who are living in the West, but also Muslims who are living in Muslim majority states, which are post-colonial states that are heavily vested in Eurocentric epistemological understanding of the world, and are constantly going through an imitative project to prove their worthiness as a human by entering into the scope of Eurocentricity, and to say that we are like you, we're similar to you, in essence having that discourse rooted on a post-colonial subject that is racialized and otherized, to enter into modernity by means of imitating and trying to authenticate their humanness.